Hi, and welcome to this talk on cycles, your inner seasons, and creativity. I'm Kelsa, and I'm a Red School-certified Menstruality Mentor, which means that I educate, mentor, and empower women to live in harmony with their menstrual cycles and to tap into the powers that are hidden within the different phases of the cycle all month round, so that they can experience more fulfillment and joy and ease in their day-to-day lives. So I'm really excited and honored to be part of this event, Birthing a New Earth, because it feels so in alignment with the work that I'm doing to basically work towards a world where we're all living more sustainably. And that begins with our bodies right here and now, learning to regard our bodies as a precious resource rather than an exploitable one. And this is very much in harmony with how we're moving towards regarding the earth that we live on, the earth of our body and the earth that we live on. These two are reflected in each other. And I'm so excited to see so many of you have signed up to this talk, because it shows that this interest in this topic is really growing. And we're still very much in the first wave of this new pioneering field of menstruality. In fact, the word menstruality was only coined in 2007 by a New Zealand psychotherapist called Jane Catherine Seven. And she used this word to describe the female-bodied lived experience through all the events of our reproductive lives. So from menarche, our first bleed or period, to right through all the menstruating years, into menopause and beyond. So this is what in the Red School we call the female initiatory arc. It's an arc through our lives where, as women, we are initiated into our true power. And there is so much potential in working closely with our cycle to uncover this power. So my teachers, Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer, developed this concept of menstruality through several decades of research and pioneering work through therapy with women and listening to women's stories about their experience of menstruating and of menopause. And it has resulted in an ever-evolving body of knowledge, which you, by watching this video right now, are becoming part of. As you take these ideas and apply them in your life, you will become part of this expanding field, which is really, really exciting, because it's not a dusty tome of knowledge in a library somewhere. It's a living thing that is growing with each woman's experience. So in this talk, I'm first going to talk about what for many women is the starting point into beginning to be aware of the field of menstruality, and that is the menstruation time itself, that monthly event, which for an astounding number of women causes a lot of suffering. And maybe you're one of those. Maybe you experience suffering associated with your cycle. So I'm going to speak to the sacredness of this time and its potential rejuvenating effects. And there's much that we can do to repair the pain and suffering associated with menstruation. And it all starts with menstrual cycle awareness, the very tool that I'm going to be speaking about, because by bringing awareness to this aspect of our experience, we immediately start to transform it. We come into a closer relationship with ourselves, in which we can listen to our bodies and the signals they're giving us, because in essence, our menstrual cycle is a feedback system, which every month is telling us how we're doing physically, emotionally, spiritually, and gives us a clear indication of how well we really are on all these levels. So if rather than suffering with that, fighting it and resisting it, which our culture would encourage us to do, because our culture doesn't see menstruation as sacred and doesn't see it, the menstrual cycle, as anything significant to look at. It's something we're encouraged to simply override and carry on as normal. And I find it really astonishing, because we would never override our circadian rhythms, our day, night, wake, sleep cycles. We know the effects of overriding those if we've done a flight to a different time zone, or we've just had a really bad night's sleep, we all know the effect on our beings of being out of rhythm with ourselves in that way. And so too is it with the menstrual cycle. If something's out of sync with that, then it has a knock-on effect on everything. And it also, as I've said, is a feedback loop. So it gives us a reflection on how well we are. So in this relationship of repairing our sense of ourselves, we start with the menstruation. We start with really recognizing this time of the month as a reset point, a time when we come home to ourselves and where we can soothe our nervous systems through the radical act of rest, through, to whatever extent we can, dropping our bundle, dropping our burdens, letting go of the to-do list and dropping in. And you might be listening to this and thinking that this is impossible for you, that you have a busy family life and or work life, business, juggling lots of things, which is an incredibly common situation. And yet, in the Red School, we talk about this 1% principle, which is basically that whatever it is you would love to give yourself at the time of menstruation, this natural lying fallow point of your cycle where your energy is at its lowest and you're probably most inward and less socially engaged, that if you can imagine what you would give yourself at this time in the ideal scenario where you had all the time in the world, and give yourself 1% of that each month, this is a really potent practice, because from that 1% you will start to experience the benefits and expand from that 1% into giving yourself more. And it's quite magical how it happens. When I look back at when I first started looking at menstrual cycle awareness several years ago, I found it impossible to stop completely, and I had a lot of pain at that point. I used to have pain during my period to the point where I needed to take painkillers, needed to lie down for at least the first day. Sometimes was even sick with the pain in the past. And it was so uncomfortable that I could only give myself, even with that degree of pain, I could only give myself maybe a couple of hours of just stopping and resting, because I didn't know that I needed more. And it was only when I discovered this work that I started to change that and began to give myself day one, first day of my bleed, which for me is the heaviest day, but for you it might be day 2 or day 3. It really varies from woman to woman. So giving myself that full day to just drop all work and drop all responsibilities was amazing. It was a revelation, because from that place I could discover what was actually going on inside me, and there was a lot. It felt like I was releasing not only on a physical level, because obviously we're shedding our womb lining, and that's quite a profound physical event. There's a huge biological hormonal shift going on, but also shedding on the deeper layers, emotional and spiritual, letting go of all the toxins I'd accumulated from my environment in the past month, all the times I'd said yes when I meant no, all the times that I'd overridden myself and my instincts. I was dropping that, releasing that, and coming back home to this really sweet feeling of self-connection. And slowly over time, this grew from giving myself day 1 to many months, if not most months, giving myself 2 to 3 days of complete rest and relaxation. And so it's amazing what can come out of that. And when we're able to give ourselves more time, more days out of our cycle, this can lead us to travel deeper and further into the vast, expansive territory that's available with menstruation. So if we look at ancient history and the way that people used to live, and some tribes still do live, the women would all menstruate together and they would be synced together. They would typically bleed together on the new moon. And they would completely retreat from everyday life and spend time together to simply bleed and rest and recharge for as long as 6 days. And then they would return to their tribe and they would bring a vision. So this is This is a card from the Red Power cards created by Red School, which each card has a power from the menstrual cycle, from the different inner seasons of the menstrual cycle. And they would come back with a vision that is only able to land when we really make space, when we really empty out and surrender and let go of the doing. And this vision would benefit the whole tribe. The tribe would respond and take action on that. So it could be something like, this is where we need to move to graze next, to graze our cattle, or this is how we need to resolve an ongoing problem in the tribe. So this very potential for vision and clarity and direction and next steps on whatever it is you're creating in your life right now, this is all available to you. Even with the 1%, even with the dropping in, if you really drop in a focused way, lying on your bed, turning the phone off, telling everyone you're off limits for a couple of hours, you can enter into this space to some degree. And if you're able to give yourself what we call the big bleed, which is where you organize ahead of time to give yourself the space to have a full retreat, so it could be 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. Perhaps you go away somewhere to where you can have your food brought to you and have all your needs met without having to do anything. There are women who offer this service throughout the UK at least, and probably across the world. I'm aware of it in the UK, where the Red School have prompted this uprising of kind of mini red tents where a woman can come and just bleed and be served. So that is an option. Or it could simply look like spending 3 days going for lots of walks in nature, lying down on the earth, letting yourself be rejuvenated by your contact with the earth and by releasing your blood to the earth. A really potent practice for this time is to actually physically give our blood to the earth, which is becoming quite a popular worldwide practice at the moment, based on a Hopi proverb which says that when all the women return their blood to the earth, the men will return from war. And it's really, again, about this anchoring of the divine feminine in this world, because to live sustainably and to not be destroying our environment and each other, we need to be in a deep reverence of the sacred and recognizing the sacredness of our blood, which is the very potential for life, is so, so powerful. And returning it to the earth reconnects us with the idea that our body is the earth. And it's also recognizing the life-giving sacred elixir that is flowing from our body at this time. So another way to recognize the sacredness of your menstruation is to create a nest for yourself, a physical space where you can really drop in lots of pillows and whatever makes you feel comfortable, your favorite snacks, healthy snacks and drinks, and an altar. You can create an altar, especially for this time of the month, where you place objects of significance to you that help you connect with the sacred and remind you that this is a sacred time. You might also want to put on a necklace or another piece of jewelry that reminds you that you're crossing this portal, you're going into the inner temple. And this can also signify to those around you if you let them know what it means. So really key to sacred menstruation is this concept of separation, of separating from the everyday life and from the everyday ego, or the self that we associate with our roles and responsibilities as perhaps parent, mother, sister, partner, wife, businesswoman, whatever it is, artist, whatever it is that you're creating in your life. At menstruation, this is a time where you actually can drop all of that and come back to what is the essence underneath it. What is your soul's calling that has brought you into this work or into this manifestation in your life? And we'll explore this more later in the talk when we look at the seasons and creativity. So I've touched on the fact that our culture doesn't really encourage us to rest at this time, and often when we're in our younger years, in our 20s, we can get away with it. We can feel like our menstruation is not a big event, because unless we suffer from particular disorders such as endometriosis and fibromyalgia and other reproductive conditions, we can kind of kid ourselves that it doesn't matter and that we can just carry on as normal, particularly if we can just pop a painkiller. And there's no judgment in this, because this is what we grow up with. This is the message we receive is, yes, you're bleeding, but you can still play a tennis match. And that might be true, but it takes an enormous toll on the body because we're not resting at the time when our bodies are designed to. And while we can get away with it in our younger years, quite often, as we get to mid-30s onwards, our body will start to show us very clearly that this is not working. So that's when problems can start to develop with our cycle and with other aspects of our health and well-being. And it's also very much part of the picture of burnout, what leads to a situation where we just run out of energy, we end up with adrenal fatigue. According to pelvic care specialist Catherine Hale, womb fatigue is incredibly common in our culture, in Western culture. And I feel really sad when I hear that our wombs are just fatigued because we're not resting them at the time that we need to, and we're putting strain on them. And often what that can create is a situation where we don't release each month during our bleed, we don't release properly. And so our wombs don't have the strength, the muscle, actual uterine muscles don't have the strength to release all the blood, and then there is stagnancy in our system. So if we're able to give ourselves a big bleed, maybe 2-3 times a year, ideally every month, but most people's lives don't look that way. But if you can, 2 or 3 times a year, give yourself a big bleed retreat where you can really drop in, receive the insights, receive the vision, then this will have a knock-on effect on how much energy you have in the next cycle and throughout your life. And even if you give yourself 1%, you'll see a difference in the energy that is available to you. So let's go a bit deeper now into our cycle as a whole. So if you imagine that we have 2 poles, a north pole and a south pole, that we are always either landed in or revolving around and moving between. You have the north pole of menstruation, which is the time when our energy is at its lowest and we're most inward, the time when we rest. And then opposite that, we have ovulation, which is potentially the time when our energy is most outward, expansive, productive, and we are likely to be more sociable and engaged with the outside world. During ovulation time, we tend to have more patience and generosity with our lives, our whole sphere of life, whether that's our partner, our children, our business. We tend to just have more to give. And so these are 2 polarities, and if we can just simply recognize that there are 2 polarities that naturally exist within the month and that we cannot stay in either one of these, we're always going to move to the other at some point. There's a lot of relaxation around that and self-acceptance and self-compassion, because in our culture, which values productivity and efficiency and outward achievement almost above everything else, it's very easy to really only value the ovulation time, which we call the summertime in this work, the summertime as opposed to the winter time of menstruation. So these are the 2 core seasons that I'm starting with. And so often when we start to move towards the menstruation, towards the winter, we feel like we're a bit lost, like we've lost our sense of who we are in the world and what we are actually contributing, because our focus goes inwards and our energy goes down. But in fact, this is completely normal and necessary, because if we didn't have this moving from one to the other, we would not be very sustainable. Our systems would not be sustainable. All systems need change and flexibility to be stable. And if we stayed in summer the whole month through, that would be a recipe for burnout, because we would just keep giving and going and doing until there's nothing left. But because we are blessed with these 2 opposing energy currents, which in the Red School we call the via positiva, which is the energy moving towards ovulation and is moving outward, and the via negativa, which is moving towards menstruation, which is also called the way of the feminine. Because we have these 2 opposing energy currents, one going out and up and one going in and down, we have a natural built-in stability to our system and sustainability, which is really beautiful if we can embrace it. So in between summer and winter, we have 2 other seasons. And depending on where you live on the planet, you may or may not have a strong experience of distinct seasons. But here in the Northern Hemisphere, where I live, although I did grow up in South Africa in the Southern Hemisphere, so I can relate to both. I can relate to having distinct seasons and not such distinct seasons. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we have a very useful archetypal map which you can use to apply to your experience through your cycle. And it's a map, and yet your experience will be unique and will be yours. So everything that I'm saying is just something to take as a template, but please go with what your body is telling you. So we have summer, we have winter, and we also have, of course, autumn and spring. Now, spring is the pre-ovulation time. It's when we've come out of our deep winter reset, rejuvenation point, hopefully. And we are now starting to wake up again. We're starting to feel the shoots coming up above the ground. And it's as if we're a newly hatched chick. And so moving tenderly in spring is really, really important. Because sometimes that rising energy of the via positiva, this outward, upward energy flow, can be quite intoxicating and even sometimes destabilizing, because we go from this quite inward space to suddenly, oh, I've got all this energy, I don't quite know what to do with it. It can get a bit scattered or a little overwhelming, and particularly for women who've had trauma in their past, spring or pre-ovulation time can activate that in the body and can make us more aware of the places where we are really tender and in need of self-compassion and in need of cherishing. Cherish is another really key word for this season. So it's about cherishing our ideas. It's about cherishing our ideas and cherishing ourselves. Whatever ideas or new projects we're planning to birth, this is the time to treat them as seedlings and hold them close to our heart rather than launching them out into the outside world, because at this stage we're very vulnerable to criticism and negative feedback, and that can be really crushing to the spirit and crushing to a new project. So if you do feel in spring to share your project with others, make sure you share it with those that you know will be supportive, and ask them specifically for only supportive feedback at this stage. Later in the cycle, there is time for other kinds of feedback. In spring, it's a time to try out your ideas without getting too serious and driven about it. It's about, yes, it's good to have focus, start to focus on your project, but not to be driving yourself into the ground with it. Really allow time for play and experimentation, brainstorm ideas, bounce ideas off trusted friends. But it's not a time it's not a time to solidify things yet. Then as we cross over from spring to summer into ovulation time, into the height of our via positiva energy, of our outward, upward moving energy, this is a time where whatever we've been playing with in spring, we can give form to it. We can start to really say yes to some aspect of that and to commit to it and commit our energy to it, so we're moving forwards in a concrete way. And this is the season for going for it, for doing the work, and also for magnetizing opportunities to us. We're very magnetic at this time, and this is a time of the cycle where we are estrogen dominant, where our estrogen levels are at their highest. And because this is connected to us being fertile and potentially able to create life on a physical level, we are more people-pleasing at this time. We're more likely to say yes to things that we might say no to at other times of the cycle, like premenstrually in particular. A time to really start something new in a way that is quite exposed to the outside world, because at this stage you're more resilient, you're able to flow with it. You're more in the flow. You're more in a space of flow where everything is just happening, and the momentum of the project can just carry you forward without you needing to try so hard. And then in autumn, there's a shift, and that's because we're changing tides, we're changing energy from the via positiva to the via negativa, from the way of the masculine to the way of the feminine. And that is when we can start to notice our energy levels dropping and a desire to withdraw or a need to withdraw. Even if we don't want to withdraw, we might just find life has become a bit overwhelming and we need to have more space to ourselves, more downtime. And if we don't or we can't, then this irritability can emerge and this sense of tension of rubbing up against the areas of our lives that don't work. You know, suddenly the schedule that we took on in summer is feeling really unworkable and unmanageable. And that's why it's often said in this work, in this menstruality work, don't let your summer woman take charge of your calendar. So in summer we feel this yes, we feel this what can feel like this limitless possibility energy. But remember, when you're taking on things in summer, to not plan past that season. So as you start the practice of menstrual cycle awareness, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes, you will start to know when your autumn is going to begin, when your premenstrual season will begin, and therefore not to plan too much for that time, to give it a bit more breathing room than you would in the summer. Another aspect of autumn is the inner critic, and this has a lot of potential, both negative and positive. It can be destructive, it can be self-destructive, this critic which suddenly sees fault in everything and everyone, and also in ourselves, also in our projects. We can suddenly look at what we've been creating and be really doubtful about it and wonder if it has any worth. And this can be very challenging. It can often plunge women into depression or anxiety, particularly if there's a history of mental health issues. But also this time has such potential if we can really ramp up our self-care, whatever your self-care practices are, to really increase it at this time. Then you will also be able to tap into the hidden power of this time, connected with our inner critic, which is being a truth speaker. So this inner critic can see what could not be seen in the previous seasons. It's as if the rose-tinted spectacles fall away and it's very clear now what isn't working. And with that comes the ability to speak to what needs to change. That can be a very, very valuable asset in your business, in your family life, whatever area you are creating in. And the key is to do it with awareness and gentleness and compassion, and planning ahead if you can, so that you know you're not just lashing out in the moment. However, this is a trap we can all fall into at this time, so it's important to be easy and gentle with yourself and self-forgiving, because the energies are potentially quite challenging at this time. We face our shadow, we face all the parts of ourselves that are not so easy to be with, and that can be reflected in those around us. So sometimes there are going to be times where we just lose it and explode at someone, and then it's important to just go back and make amends and rectify that situation and take responsibility for it. But we can deliver a razor sharp truth and razor sharp insight to whatever it is we're involved in at this time. It's such a powerful asset. So I talked about how in summer we're in an estrogen dominant phase where we tend to say yes to more things and people. And in autumn we find our no. We find not only the need to say no, but also the ability to say no is more accessible. So it can be a good time to have a difficult conversation with someone that you've been putting off, because you'll be clearer, your progesterone levels are higher, and this supports you to actually face that boss or other person who has been crossing your boundaries, essentially, and stand up for yourself. So the starting point for beginning to identify how to work with your inner seasons is to practice menstrual cycle awareness. And this is something I coach and mentor in on a personal level and also in a group level. I run regular online courses, which you can find out more about on my website. But a starting point, which you can even begin today, is to start writing down each day what day of your cycle you are on. Day 1 being the first day of your flow of blood. So I'm not talking about what many women experience, spotting, which is like sporadic brown blood and is not a consistent flow. But the first day of full flow would be day 1, and you write down what day you're on and how you're feeling. Just a few key words: emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, how you're feeling, and any significant events that have occurred that day, synchronicities, dreams, arguments, opportunities, breakthroughs, achievements, to just note those down. And this little daily discipline, which can take 5 minutes or less, and there are many beautiful ways of charting. You can do it visually as well. If you're not such a writing orientated person, you can draw, you can voice record, you can create an online meme, like a piece of chart art, as the Red School have some resources on this. But I would really encourage you to find a way that works for you, and then over time you can look back and see the patterns that are emerging. What are you seeing that's consistent? What needs do you have in different seasons of your cycle, and how can you meet those? How can you ask those around you to be aware of them, to meet them? And this is a really key part, because, for example, I used to have really challenging autumns where I would always end up arguing with my partner, feeling really tense and stressed and overwhelmed and just completely negative about life. And through menstrual cycle awareness, I got to a place where not only was I actually in deeper connection with myself in this time and hearing what I needed, putting that into practice and therefore not experiencing this overwhelm and tension, but I also was able to express to my partner that what I needed from him was space, but also availability. And this isn't the same for all women. You might only need space, or you might need a lot of care and availability. This was my experience of tuning into my needs. I needed him to be available and not to distance himself, but I needed to be able to come to him on my own terms so that I was not feeling demanded on or controlled or in any way beholden to anyone during this time. That was really important for me. And during the years when I was a single mom, obviously this was very difficult to put into practice with my son when he was young, but still having the awareness of what I was going through and the awareness of what was happening in me was really helpful for being compassionate with both myself and my young son. And as he got older, I was more able to communicate with him about this, about needing more space and time. So it's a real opportunity to tune into our needs. And through this practice of menstrual cycle awareness, we become empowered to actually plan our lives in ways that work for us rather than against us, that take advantage of our natural rhythms rather than stretching us to the limit with our resources. So I've talked about how the menstrual cycle relates to your projects, but there's a deeper layer in terms of creativity, there's a deeper layer that we can look at, which is the overall creative phases of our lives. And these creative phases are going on all the time. So regardless of where you are right now in your menstrual cycle, you might be, say, in the summer of a project that you're creating. Let's say you've created a new business and you're now launching it, sharing it with the world. You're in the manifest stage in creative terms. You're in the manifest stage of your project. And at a certain point, you might well move into a refining stage, a discerning stage, which corresponds to the inner autumn. And this is the time when you might look at everything you've put out there, your website, your offerings, and see that something needs to change, that there needs to be some editing. Maybe you want to ask someone to support you with that, to put their eye over your work and give some editing to it. And it's really about refining and polishing what you have and extracting the diamond from the dust. Because whatever it is you're creating, if you're writing a book and you're now in the editing stage of your book, there is a time when the full flow of just creative outpouring comes to a stop, and the energy comes back to revisiting what you've done and checking in. How much does this actually say what I really want to say? How much is it really expressing who I am? And so you can do quite a lot of work on that in the discernment phase of a creative project. And also in your natural inner autumn, in your premenstrual time, this is the ideal time to edit a project you've been working on. It's an ideal time to take a final look at the details of anything that you're engaged in, because you're more likely to see those details. And then there's a really precious time when you actually might hit a wall in whatever it is you're creating and feel like you can't go any further. You might feel creatively blocked, you might feel stuck, you might just feel exhausted and weary with the whole thing. Maybe you wonder what it's all about and what the point is. And this is the time to step away. Just as in winter, in our inner winter menstruation time, we step away from the outside demands for an hour or a day or however much we can manage, and come back to ourselves, in this stage, which is called the potentized creative phase, we actually open up to the real potency of our work through stepping away. And this might seem counterintuitive because we're so conditioned to think we can only create by doing and making things happen. But if you remember this energy current of the via negativa, which is the opposite of the via positiva, it's the way of the feminine, it has a way of creation that is just as potent as the way of the will that we see in via positiva. And that is the way of surrender, the way of allowing things to come towards us and emptying out so that we can be filled again. So it's dropping the project for hours, days, weeks, even months, depending what it is, and letting it just breathe, take a break, and get some fresh inspiration from having that rest, and then come back to it. And you will see it with different eyes. You'll reconnect with the real message of your work and the real intention of it. I think it's really powerful to set an intention at the beginning of each project as we move into the initiate phase or the spring phase, where we're starting to just play with ideas and just see what's there. What are we working with? Start to experiment. The initiate phase is very much about getting started. Just getting started, even if you think you have no idea how the whole project is going to look, you don't know what all the steps are, maybe it even feels a bit daunting, overwhelming, or you can't imagine it. It's about just getting started and taking that first step, having that brainstorm, having that play around, seeing what juicy ideas might be there. And at this time, setting an intention, getting clearer on your intention of what you're creating is really important, so you can then say yes to that as you move into the manifest. And you can be really clear what you're creating. When you come back to potentized phase, when everything is lying fallow and you're taking this breathing space from your work, that is when you can reconnect to a deeper intention that is then going to feed the next cycle of creation. Just as in our bleed, in our winter time at menstruation, we can be receptive to a vision that then feeds our next moon cycle, our next menstrual cycle. We can take that into our spring and start to sow new seeds of what we're creating. So it's a really beautiful organic process that is constantly working us, and we really just have to cooperate with it, because if we don't, that's when we start to experience tension and conflict, inner and outer. At any given time, we're also interacting with larger cycles. So as I've said, you might be in an outer autumn in your project, but in an inner summer. But equally, you could be in inner autumn or inner winter and have to go to a business meeting where you need to be really outward and focused and left-brained, and logical. And that's the last thing you feel like doing when you're in deep winter. But the key is to bring the quality of whatever season you're in and whatever day of your menstrual cycle you're in to what you're doing, and just trust that, because it's not always going to line up. The outer calendar is not always going to be perfectly matched with your cycle. Even if you plan your life according to your cycle, there could be times where suddenly your cycle goes out of sync and you bleed slightly earlier or later, and then everything's at a different time, or a huge opportunity comes to you from the outside world that you just can't say no to, but it's not the right time, and you're going to take it anyway. So bring the quality that you're in. So let's say you're in a business meeting and you're feeling really inward and you're in the depths of winter. You can bring such deep insight from that place, such clarity and such stillness, because you're only going to say what's necessary and important, and that could be such a blessing and a gift to the space. So it's about trusting that and staying with yourself, not leaving your state, not leaving where you're at to meet what's outer, but meeting what's there with where you are at right now. And this all starts with a daily practice of menstrual cycle awareness, and also is supported by sharing this with others around you, finding supportive groups of women that you can speak this language with and check in with each other. Hey, I'm in summer, I'm feeling like this, or I'm in winter, I'm feeling like this, I'm on day 22 and I'm just had enough and I want to run away from the kids. And these supportive groups are so important for changing our culture at large and birthing the divine feminine on this earth. I have a Facebook group called Rewilding the Womb, where you can very much be immersed in this language, And you can also create it in your circles right now where you are by speaking to this. And every woman's cycle will be different, so yours might follow the classic 28-day cycle pattern, or it might be 25 days or 32 days. 25 to 32 is a normal range. But on average, each of the key seasons, summer and winter, the North and South Pole, will be about a week, and then spring and autumn are a bit less, maybe 5-6 days. So that will give you a rough guide that you can use to map your cycle, and you can also start to pinpoint the days where you're crossing from one season to another, which can be vulnerable days, can be wobbly days where you need extra self-care, and also to take that into account in your planning, so that whatever you're creating in your life, you give yourself that space on those days to just be with yourself a bit more and not expect too much. So I was talking about the outer seasons, the outer cycles that are going on at the same time as the inner ones, and one that you're probably already aware of is the cosmic cycles, the full moon, the new moon. Where are you at in relation to that? So there is no one right time to have your menstrual cycle. Some women bleed on new moon, some women bleed on full moon, others in between. There isn't really a right way, but what can often happen is that you notice different energies at different times. So if you are bleeding at new moon, you might find it easier to rest and go inward because the new moon energies are really supportive of that. There is a real stillness to the energies of new moon. However, if you're bleeding at full moon, you might find it a bit more challenging to do that. Maybe you find more of your shadow coming up, more intensity coming up. And there's also the potential for more ecstasy, because another power hidden within our winter time is ecstasy. So you might actually feel really full of life and ecstatic at this time if it's a full moon. So it's worth just noticing these correspondences and how do you respond to eclipses and equinoxes and moon cycles in terms of your inner cycle, because all of these things are being layered on top of each other. So I hope this has given you some inspiration to start working with your cycles and unlock the powers that are hidden within them and meet the creative challenges and explorations of your life from this place. Thank you for tuning in and watching, and I'm wishing you all the best with your journey of menstrual cycle awareness.